the heart of the Weald of Kent, tucked among meadows and slow-moving streams, stands a fortress that time never quite silenced. Hever Castle rises from its moat like a survivor of its own past, stone walls streaked by rain, battlements softened by moss, ivy coiling upward as though drawn by memory. It is not vast like Windsor, nor grim like the Tower. It is intimate, almost modest, a home that learned to guard its secrets. The story begins in the late 13th century, when a Norman landowner named William de Hever built a fortified manor here to command the Eden Valley. Its square keep and narrow slit windows spoke of troubled times. England was still patching itself together after a century of barons' wars, and Kent's position, gateway to the continent, meant a house had to watch its bridges. A drawbridge once crossed the very moat that glimmers there still, its water fed by the river Eden looping close enough to reflect the towers. In those days, the castle's rooms were plain, stone, timber, rush-covered floors, the smell of smoke and damp earth. Servants slept where they worked. Light came from tallow candles that stung the eyes. Through the next 2 centuries, Hever passed between minor gentry until Geoffrey Boleyn, a wealthy London mercer turned politician, purchased it in 1462. Geoffrey had been Lord Mayor of London, proof that ambition could raise a man higher than birth. He rebuilt Hever not as a fortress but as a statement of arrival. Timber beams replaced old rafters. Glass windows caught more light. The chapel gained fine carving. To step through the gatehouse was to feel both safety and status. When Geoffrey died, his grandson Thomas Boleyn inherited the estate. By 1505, Hever was the seat of a family climbing quickly at court. Thomas served as diplomat, a man of letters and languages, and his children, George, Mary, and Anne, were born into a world of opportunity. Here, within the Kentish quiet, they learned the polished arts that would make them welcome at the palaces of kings. The garden paths that circle the moat today trace those early walks, the children's laughter echoing off stone, falcons crying overhead, and the distant chime of Hever's chapel bell. The castle's stones have absorbed more than the clatter of daily life. Visitors swear that even now, when dusk gathers over the moat, you can hear a rhythm beneath the wind, the faint hollow knock of hooves crossing a long-vanished drawbridge. Some dismiss it as the trick of reeds in the current. Others, remembering Kent's old folk belief that running water holds the voices of the dead, prefer not to listen too closely. By the turn of the 16th century, Hever had become both family home and diplomatic retreat. Letters from foreign ambassadors mention the pleasant house of Master Boleyn, where the orchards hang thick with fruit. It was the ideal refuge for a man often abroad in the service of Henry VIII. Within its walls the young Anne grew, bright, musical, restless. The castle's rhythm, the hum of bees in the rose garden, the slow toll from St. Peter's Church down the lane would mark the tempo of her childhood. Later, when life swept her into the perilous theatre of royal desire, this place would linger in her as memory of peace. Hever, though, was never just another Tudor manor. Its moat wrapped around it like punctuation, a full stop between safety and the wider, hungrier world. Old chroniclers spoke of lantern lights gliding across the water long after curfew, of the faint scrape of a boat chain when the surface should have been frozen solid. In 1858, a local antiquarian, Henry Bosville, wrote of visiting the castle ruins before the Astor Restoration. Even in noon daylight, the air is heavier there than without. One feels watched from the upper windows, as though the house itself retained the habits of observation. Whether he meant ghosts or merely history, he never said. Inside, the architecture still tells its layered story. The medieval gatehouse remains almost untouched, its portcullis groove still scarred by friction, its oak door thick enough to resist both arrow and weather. Beyond it, Tudor craft softens the severity, carved spandrels, mullioned windows, a hearth wide enough for a man to stand in. Each generation patched and altered, yet nothing replaced the bones. Walk the corridors now, and every step clicks against centuries. The air smells of polish, damp stone, and something older, the trace of smoke baked into timber that has seen 1,000 winters. For the Boleyns, Hever was proof of ascent, the country estate that turned a merchant's lineage into nobility. For everyone since, it is proof of endurance. Its moat still mirrors the sky, sometimes clouded, sometimes clear. Its halls have heard diplomacy, romance, accusation, silence. Some nights, they say, when fog rolls from the river and the moonlight catches the arrow loops just right, you can see the shimmer of that first drawbridge rising, not in metal or wood, but in reflection, as if the castle, remembering its first life as a fortress, still prepares itself for what history might yet bring to its door. Hever was already an old house when Anne Boleyn first opened her eyes beneath its timbered roof. Sometime around 1501, the castle's thick walls and quiet moat sheltered a childhood that would, in hindsight, feel almost impossibly brief. No one who watched the clever, dark-eyed girl chasing her brother George across the courtyard could have guessed she would one day divide a kingdom. The Boleyn family were rising fast. Her father, Sir Thomas Boleyn, spoke fluent French and Latin, and his deft diplomacy made him indispensable to Henry VII and later Henry VIII. Her mother, Lady Elizabeth Howard, came from one of England's oldest noble families, the Howards of Norfolk. Between them, they created a household balance between old blood and new ambition. Hever, though far from court, was a miniature reflection of the world they aspired to join. Educated servants, good wine, music after supper, a private chapel where prayers were said in Latin under flickering beeswax candles. Outside the moat stretched orchards, kitchen gardens, and the famed rose walk. Even now, those gardens keep their original pattern, narrow paths bordered by clipped yew, the air thick with the scent of herbs and flowers. In Anne's day, the roses were not mere decoration, they were medicine, perfume, and symbol. The red rose of Lancaster, the white of York, the Tudor rose that bound them, all planted here in quiet symmetry. To walk among them was to breathe politics disguised as beauty. Anne's first education came from her mother and the family chaplain, reading the Psalter, copying scripture, learning to embroider and dance. But Thomas saw that his daughter's futures depended on refinement beyond Hever's moat. In 1513, Anne was sent abroad, first to the court of Margaret of Austria in the Netherlands, and later to Queen Claude of France, where she absorbed the grace, fashion, and intelligence that would make her unforgettable. When she returned to England nearly 7 years later, she spoke French with ease, moved with continental poise, and carried herself not as a merchant's granddaughter, but as a lady of the world. Yet, for all her Polish, Anne's heart never quite left Kent. In letters written later from court, fragments of nostalgia surface, lines about the sweet air of my father's house, and the quiet of our orchards where no flattery intrudes. One surviving note, preserved among the Vatican's Epistolae Henriciate, bears Henry's own seal and was sent to Hever Castle, an early draft of his love that would alter history. The script trembles between devotion and obsession, addressing her as my heart and my mistress before promising marriage if only she would yield. She did not yield, not yet. And so the courtship lengthened, and the letters multiplied, passing along the lanes of Kent like sparks on dry grass. Imagine Hever in those years of dangerous romance. The same rooms we see today, lit by rushlights, a young woman reading by the window, her face half in candle shadow as her father paces below in the hall, calculating risk against glory. Outside, winter presses its reflection against the frozen moat. The only sound is parchment creasing and the faint scratch of a quill. The servants whispered about these letters. Some said Anne burned them in the hearth as soon as she read them, fearing discovery. Others claimed she hid them behind the wainscot in her chamber. When later restorers prized open old panels, they found no royal correspondence, only a single, small scrap of parchment marked with the Tudor rose, too faded to read. Whether planted or genuine, it fueled the legend that the castle still holds traces of her hand. It is in these years that the first gentle hauntings of Hever begin to surface, not in fear, but in echo. Gardeners working late among the roses spoke of hearing soft humming, a French lullaby, faint and tuneless, as if carried on mist. In 1892, long after the Boleyns were dust, a vicar visiting from Edinburgh recorded in his diary that he heard a voice singing in the south garden, though the gate was locked and the hour near midnight. He dismissed it as wind in the hedges, yet noted that the scent of roses followed him halfway back to the village. Perhaps psychologists today might call these residual impressions the emotional replay of a life lived intensely in one place. For the people of Kent, it was simpler. She comes back because she loved it here. Hever was Anne's haven during the early storms of Henry's pursuit. When she withdrew from court to escape the gossip of Catherine of Aragon's supporters, it was here she sought refuge. Her father's diplomacy could not silence scandal, but the moat could hold it at bay. In winter, she read by the hearth. In summer, she walked the rose path, each step measured, each thought a calculation. The old oak by the bridge, where her ghost is said to pause centuries later, was already large then, a tree older than the family's fortunes. Beneath its branches, she might have dreamt of safety or of escape. There are no ghosts recorded from Anne's lifetime, only the steady rhythm of a household at its peak. But after her fall, Hever fell quiet. Servants spoke less, fires burned lower, and the place seemed to hold its breath. When later owners walked its grounds, they described an atmosphere at once peaceful and melancholy, as if the walls themselves remembered laughter and were waiting for it to return. To stand there today, in the half-light before morning, is to feel that same suspension. The roses still bloom against the grey stone, scent spilling over the moat. The chapel bell still tolls the hour, and sometimes, when mist rises from the water, you can almost see her. Not the doomed queen of portraits in history books, but the girl of Hever, a flash of dark hair and silk moving between the hedgerows, pausing to breathe in the world she once called home. By the late 1520s, the quiet rhythms of Hever Castle had been eclipsed by a storm gathering at court. Anne Boleyn, once the clever girl who ran the rose paths of Kent, had returned from France, a woman unlike any the Tudor court had seen. She was quick-tongued, educated, and more self-possessed than conventional loud. When she entered the royal dance halls, the courtiers shifted like metal filings around a lodestone. And when Henry VIII first looked her way, England's fate changed direction. Hever felt the tremor before anyone else. Letters began arriving under royal seal. Messengers splashed their horses through the moat gate by torchlight. Thomas Boleyn, now Viscount Rochford, watched with the wary pride of a man whose daughter was being courted by a sun that could burn as easily as it warmed. Anne's sister, Mary, had already been Henry's mistress. The family knew the pattern. But this time, the pattern refused to repeat. Anne would not be a royal diversion. She demanded a crown. At first the court laughed. Then they realized she was serious, and that Henry was listening. What began as flirtation grew into an obsession that unraveled England's religious fabric. The king wrote her more than a dozen letters, promising marriage, pleading for patience. One was sent directly to Hever, carried by trusted courier and sealed with his own emblem. In it, he called her my mistress and my heart, promising that no other woman would ever hold his affection. The letter survives still, its ink faded to brown, the wax cracked by centuries, but the urgency on the page remains. From Hever, Anne wrote back with careful restraint, her words measured, her affection conditional. She had seen what happened to women who yielded too soon. In her refusal, she gained power, a dangerous kind that set the whole kingdom trembling. By 1531, Henry's visits to Hever became the stuff of rumour. Chronicles describe his hunting parties lodging at the nearby village of Edenbridge, the king himself riding through the gates under pretext of diplomacy. The locals knew better. They called her the Maid of Kent, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with envy. One cold evening, the household gathered to watch the royal barge glide up the Eden River. Torches flared on the water, lighting the reflection of the castle walls. From the upper window, Anne looked down, her hand resting on the sill that still bears tiny indentations where, centuries later, a visitor would claim to feel her ghost's desperate pounding. The great affair was no longer secret. In 1533, Henry defied Rome, married Anne, and crowned her queen in Westminster Abbey. Hever rejoiced for a while. Thomas Boleyn's banners flew from the gatehouse, and the family crest glittered with new pride. Anne, radiant in cloth of gold, seemed to have conquered fate itself. Yet those who knew Tudor fortune understood that nothing rose so high without the ground waiting to reclaim it. Her reign lasted barely 3 years. Elizabeth was born at Greenwich in 1533, a healthy girl, but not the son the king demanded. The miscarriages that followed eroded Henry's patience and emboldened his enemies. By early 1536, the same courtiers who once bowed to her favour whispered the word treason. When the king's eye turned to Jane Seymour, Anne's crown became a target. On the 2nd of May 1536, she was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. The charges, adultery, incest, conspiracy against the king, were as sensational as they were unfounded. Her brother George was accused alongside her. They were both condemned. Records show that Thomas Boleyn remained at court during the trial, forced to serve on the commission that sealed his own children's deaths. What he thought of the verdict, no one recorded. But after her execution on the 19th of May 1536, he retreated to Hever. Contemporary reports note that he refused audiences, that he rode the grounds at dusk and spoke little. And there, the legends say, the haunting began. Locals claimed that on the first Christmas Eve after her death, lights flickered in the windows, though the household slept. The drawbridge creaked, as if lowered for unseen guests. Some said they saw a woman in black standing beneath the oak, her face hidden, her presence heavy as frost. Others insisted they heard nothing, yet awoke weeping without knowing why. Historically, the castle itself bore the marks of grief. Within a year, its tapestries were removed, its gardens neglected. Thomas died in 1539, the estate passing briefly to the crown, then to Anne of Cleves as part of her marriage settlement. But to those who walked its halls afterward, the air never fully cleared. Visitors in the 1600s spoke of a weeping in the walls, a low rhythmic sound between the chapel and the long gallery. In 1701, a traveller named John Avery recorded a stay in the village inn where the women tell of a queen who crosses water each winter and will not speak. Skeptics call these post-Tudor fictions the natural embroidery of a scandal too famous to forget. Yet even scholars concede that Hever, more than any other place linked to Anne Boleyn, feels personal, not royal, not political, but human. It was the place where ambition was born and where memory came home to mourn. Look long enough into the moat on a still night and you may see how the water holds the stars, bright points, trembling on a surface that never rests. It is an old superstition that moving water binds what cannot be laid to rest, a mirror for those who cannot stop returning. At Hever, the mirror remains. Each Christmas, when the air freezes over the bridge and the gardens fall silent, locals say she comes again, her reflection bending in the current. Not the crowned queen of Holbein's portraits, nor the condemned woman in the tower courtyard, but Anne of Hever, the daughter, the lover, the ghost whose story the castle refuses to forget. Winter holds Hever in a different light. The gardens sleep under frost, the moat turns to pewter, and mist creeps low across the lawns as though the earth itself exhales. The castle's walls, grey by day, seem almost translucent at night, the moonlight catching in every leaded pane. Inside, the air thickens with silence. Even the clocks in the great hall seem to tick more slowly, as if time itself hesitates. For centuries, the people of Kent have said that when Christmas Eve descends, Hever Castle wakes. Each year, as the last candle in the great hall gutters out, a figure is seen crossing the narrow bridge that spans the River Eden. She moves with purpose, yet weightlessly, as if the air holds her up. Her gown is heavy Tudor brocade, patterned faintly with gold, her hood drawn low, concealing a pale, sorrowful face. The mist parts around her like a curtain. Those who claim to have seen her say she pauses halfway across the bridge, glancing toward the great oak on the far bank, a tree older than the castle's ghosts, where Anne and Henry once walked together when love was still new. Then she fades, dissolving into the night like breath on glass. The earliest written reference to the Christmas apparition appears in the Kentish Almanac of Wonders, published in 1896. It speaks of a lady in Tudor raiment, crossing the bridge each Christmas Eve. The hour near midnight, her image reflected but her body insubstantial. No author is credited. By the turn of the 20th century, the story had spread beyond local gossip. A visitor named Edith Howard recorded in her 1904 diary that while staying in the village, she and her husband walked the castle's perimeter on Christmas Eve. She wrote, "The air was uncommonly still. The moon shone upon the water with a brightness that seemed unnatural. We saw, most distinctly, a form like a woman in ancient dress crossing the bridge. No sound of feet, nor rustle of cloth. I felt rather than heard a sigh, and in the next instant she was gone." Howard was a rationalist, a member of the Society for Psychical Research, and her account survives in their archives. Whether she truly saw a spirit or the tricks of fog and moonlight, her description matches others made decades apart. Modern staff at Hever, speaking quietly to journalists, have confirmed small anomalies that recur every December. Cold spots near the bridge, ripples in the water when there is no breeze, the scent of roses when no flowers bloom. Guides sometimes pause mid-tour, sensing that charged stillness that comes before a change in atmosphere. One, interviewed in 2011, admitted, "It feels like someone waiting to cross, but you can't see them, only the space they take up." It is tempting to dismiss the date as a Victorian embellishment, yet Christmas Eve held a special place in Tudor tradition. It was a night when, according to 16th century superstition, the boundary between the living and the dead thinned. Fires were kept low out of respect. Prayers were whispered for absent souls. For Anne, that night may have carried memories of family, of peace, of Hever's chapel lit by candles and song. It was the last sanctuary before her world became a battlefield of politics and faith. One theory suggests that Anne's ghost returns, not because of her death, but because of what she lost before it, the simple joy of belonging somewhere. In life, she moved from home to court, from court to palace, from palace to prison. Hever alone was hers, and perhaps at Christmas, a time of gathering, she seeks once more to step across her old threshold. Over the years, the legend has drawn investigators, skeptics, and storytellers. In the 1950s, members of the Kent Paranormal Study Group camped overnight in the castle grounds. Their notes mention a sudden drop in temperature near the bridge and a mist resembling a human form captured on early infrared film, the negative now long lost. In 1973, a local journalist from the Courier reported witnessing lights in the windows that moved as if carried by hand. No electricity failure was recorded that night. Psychical researchers propose that Hever's hauntings fall into the category of residual energy phenomena, echoes of human emotion impressed upon physical surroundings. According to this theory, Anne's final visit to Hever before her arrest was so charged with fear and grief that the memory imprinted itself into the castle's very structure. Each year, when the temperature and atmosphere align just right, that moment replays, like music faintly remembered. Religious visitors take a gentler view. For them, the apparition is not a trapped soul, but a pilgrimage, a queen's spirit coming home to pray on the night of peace. Indeed, the chapel records show that Mass has been held at midnight on Christmas Eve since the 15th century. Perhaps, they say, she still comes to kneel in the doorway as the first hymn rises. The oak by the bridge remains the story's axis. Botanists estimate its age at over 500 years, meaning it likely shaded Anne's steps in her youth. Legend holds that she and Henry carved their initials into its bark, though no trace survives. During the coldest winters, the moat freezes beneath its reflection, and villagers tell of a single patch of unfrozen water directly beneath where her ghost is said to pause. Scientists would call it groundwater flow. Believers call it a sign that she has crossed again. The water itself plays its part. Old Kentish superstition says that spirits are drawn to running water because it reflects both heaven and earth. Some see Anne's crossing as a ritual act, the spirit repeating her passage from innocence to fate, year after year, unable or unwilling to stop. Those who live nearby speak of the hush that descends just after midnight. Dogs fall silent. Even the wind through the eaves seems to hold its breath. Then comes the faintest sound, not footsteps, not voice, a soft rustle like silk brushing stone. A witness in 1989, walking home from Christmas service, described it as the quiet of someone choosing not to disturb the world. No photograph has ever captured her. No sound recording proves her presence. And yet, every Christmas Eve, a handful of people still gather at the edge of the moat, waiting. Some come with cameras, some with prayer. Most go home with only the cold for company. But occasionally, one walks away pale, saying little, glancing back once more toward the bridge as though uncertain whether they've seen a ghost or simply time itself, walking. The haunting of Hever is no terror tale. It carries no malice, issues no curse. It is a memory dressed in mist, a woman returning not to frighten, but to belong. On Christmas Eve, while families light fires and sing of peace on earth, the castle receives its quiet visitor, a queen at last unguarded. And when the first church bell of Christmas morning tolls across the Eden Valley, the bridge lies empty once more, the mist folding closed, the water stilling to glass. But if you listen very closely, in that hush between the chime and the silence, you might hear it, the faint exhale of the past remembering itself. The 20th century brought electricity, tourism, and modern comfort to Hever Castle. But the house remained what it had always been, a living reliquary of the past. Beneath the Astor family's restorations and the polished floors walked a silence older than restoration could erase. Visitors admired its Tudor charm by day. At night, the place reverted to itself. The walls tightened, the oak darkened, and the moat pressed its cold reflection against the windows. In 1976, that silence was broken. The letter arrived in March 1977, addressed to Lord Astor, then owner of Hever Castle. The writer was a visitor named C.W. Bamford, an unassuming man by all accounts. Not a journalist or medium, but a civil servant from Essex with an interest in history. He had taken a winter holiday in Kent and, having read of Anne Boleyn's life, arranged a stay at a nearby inn. The castle was closed for the season, but he was granted evening access through a curator who recognized his enthusiasm. Bamford's letter survives in the castle archives. Its tone is formal, hesitant, written in a tidy hand. He begins by thanking the staff for their courtesy. Then, almost apologetically, he describes what happened on the night of the 28th of December, 1976. He had been alone in the bedchamber long associated with Anne Boleyn, the small oak-panelled room overlooking the moat. The fire had burned low, and outside, frost traced the window glass. The only light came from a single candle set upon a chest by the bed. He wrote that he stood by the window, looking out across the dark water toward the bridge and the faint shape of the great oak. The night was windless, the air inside utterly still. Then came a change he could neither explain nor ignore. The air thickened, he wrote, as though the room had drawn breath and decided not to let it go. The candle flame grew narrow and blue. I felt a sudden heaviness at the base of my neck, and then, how shall I say, an impression, not seen but felt, of movement beside me. He turned, expecting the curator, but no one was there. Yet the pressure did not leave. It gathered by the window, invisible but immense. Then came the sense of someone in profound distress, fists striking stone, fingernails raking wood, a sobbing that seemed to come from behind the walls rather than within the room. He described a smell of roses, sharp and fresh, entirely out of place in midwinter, mingled with the faint tang of iron. The candle flickered violently, guttered, and went out. He wrote that he left the chamber within minutes, unable to breathe, his legs unsteady. Only when he reached the courtyard did the weight lift. It was not fear as one has of darkness, he wrote, but sorrow so great it could fill the air. Lord Astor's reply was courteous but non-committal. Privately, he showed the letter to a senior housekeeper who admitted that Bamford's description matched experiences reported by staff over the years. Cold spots near that window, the sudden scent of flowers, a sense of being watched. None had spoken of it publicly. The Astors preferred romance to ghosts in their publicity brochures. The so-called Anne Boleyn chamber lies in the castle's oldest wing, facing north toward the moat. Its window is small and leaded, its wooden frame marked by centuries of use. Beneath it stands a narrow writing desk, a reproduction, though the spot itself is authentic. The walls are lined in oak, so dark, it reflects candlelight like water. Visitors note the peculiar acoustics, the way sound dulls inside, as if the air itself absorbs it. Curators have documented environmental explanations, low temperature gradients, drafts through the stonework, yet none fully account for the pressure described by multiple witnesses. One modern restorer, working there in the 1990s, told the BBC that his tools once shifted an inch across the table when I turned away as though nudged. The Bamford incident wasn't the first. In 1934, during early restoration work, a carpenter reported hearing a woman's voice faintly singing from behind the wall panels while he replaced wiring. When he removed the boards, he found nothing, only an older layer of plaster darkened by soot. In 1961, a visiting French historian noted in his journal that his wife, standing by the same window, swayed as if pushed and declared she smelt a perfume that was not there. And in 1987, a curator named Helen Graves felt what she described as an invisible hand brushing past my shoulder, not cold but firm. She refused afterward to enter the room alone after sunset. Skeptics suggest these reports stem from expectation, the brain's tendency to turn atmosphere into experience when primed by legend. Yet Hever's stories are remarkable for their consistency. The same sensations, the same fragrance, the same unnameable pressure near the window where Anne once looked out upon her home. Perhaps psychologists label this phenomenon stone tape resonance. The idea that buildings can record emotional energy, replaying it under certain conditions. The oak paneling, dense and fibrous, could act as a kind of emotional archive. The moment of Anne's last grief, learning that she was to be taken from Hever for questioning, perhaps, or saying farewell to her father, may have imprinted itself into the walls, waiting to replay when temperature and emotion align. Environmental scientists point to carbon dioxide fluctuations, drafts, and infrasonic vibrations from the moat's moving water. Frequencies too low for hearing, but capable of inducing anxiety, chills, and the feeling of a presence. Either theory explains something, neither explains everything. What makes Bamford's account powerful isn't its sensationalism, but its restraint. He sought no fame, accepted no payment, and begged Astor not to publish his letter for fear of ridicule. He simply felt compelled to record it, a rational man conceding to an irrational moment. That letter has since become part of Hever's folklore. Guides recount it quietly during candlelight tours, lowering their voices when they reach the line about a young woman pounding on the stone. Some visitors glance toward the window then, half expecting the candlelight to flicker. Occasionally, it does. Modern guests have captured inexplicable temperature drops with handheld sensors. Others report hearing 3 soft knocks on the paneling while guides speak. In 2019, a thermal camera on a Halloween history program caught a faint silhouette by that very window, a bloom of cooler air shaped like a figure leaning forward. Skeptics called it a trick of condensation. Believers called it proof. Whatever it is, the room remains charged. Step inside alone, and the air seems different, thicker, almost listening. The moat outside gleams through the glass, and the oak branches sway without wind. Even in daylight, it feels like standing at the hinge between two centuries. One of candles and courtship. One of circuits and explanations. Somewhere between them, the memory of a woman who never found peace in life seems to persist. When the house closes each evening and the last staff member locks the door, the corridor falls into silence. Yet those who have lingered swear they hear one more sound, not footsteps, not voices, just a single breath released into the dark, as if the castle itself is exhaling her name. Walk the upper floor of Hever Castle and you enter its spine. The long gallery, 80 feet of dark oak paneling stretch between narrow Tudor windows. The ceiling low and coffered, the floor polished by 500 years of footsteps. It was Thomas Bullen's proudest addition, a corridor not merely for walking but for display. Here, portraits of ancestors and allies once hung shoulder to shoulder, candlelight shimmering across gilt frames. Courtiers used such galleries as stages for conversation and intrigue. Hever's version, intimate yet grand, was built to impress a visiting king. Now, when the public tours end and the electric lamps are switched off, the gallery reverts to its original tone, a tunnel of wood, air, and echoes. Guides closing the shutters after dusk say, "The stillness feels alive, like lungs filling and emptying just beneath the silence." The earliest record of something uncanny here appears in a 17th century diary kept by Sir Edward Wotton, a minor Kentish noble who lodged at Hever while inspecting the estate after the Boleyn line died out. He wrote of hearing a horse's tread upon planks, though no beasts could stand within the chamber. The remark was casual, more curiosity than fear. But it marks the first mention of the phantom horse, a mystery that has repeated ever since. By the Victorian era, the story had grown. Visitors claimed to hear hooves striking the floor at a slow, deliberate canter, echoing from one end of the gallery to the other. Some insisted they felt vibration underfoot, as if something large and unseen were moving past. One 1891 travelogue describes a rhythmic pounding, like a rider crossing a wooden bridge. Then silence, so complete, one could hear one's heart. Local folklore soon filled the gap with explanation. A mounted messenger racing to warn Anne of her arrest, doomed to ride the same futile course for eternity. Others said it was the spirit of a stable boy trampled by his horse during the chaos after her execution. An echo of panic trapped in timber. Whatever its source, the sound persists in accounts separated by centuries. Alongside the horse comes a subtler phenomenon, footsteps. Dozens of them. They begin lightly, like slippered feet pacing, then grow heavier, as though boots have joined the procession. Staff who lock the doors at night often hear them starting behind and ending ahead, impossible to pinpoint. In 2009, a security guard walking the gallery alone reported hearing a measured tread, 2 steps behind, matching mine exactly, stopping when I stopped. Closed-circuit microphones caught only static, but the pattern of interference mirrored his description. At the gallery's far end hangs a tall gilded mirror restored during the Astor renovations. Polished daily, it nonetheless gathers a haze within hours, a fine mist that clings even to microfiber cloth. Cleaners complain it breathes. Several guests claim to have seen movement within it when the corridor behind them was empty. A flash of white fabric, a curve of motion crossing diagonally. On winter afternoons, when sunlight slides through the narrow windows, that mirror becomes the brightest surface in the room. On moonlit nights, it swallows light instead of reflecting it. In 1984, a photographer documenting the castle's interiors caught a faint outline in the mirror's left edge. A pale blur, roughly the height of a person on horseback. The negative showed no camera fault, yet he discarded the frame, calling it too convenient. Still, the image circulated quietly among staff. To walk that gallery is to feel time stacked like dust. Beneath your feet lie Tudor beams pegged into medieval joists, beneath them Norman stone. The air tastes faintly of varnish and cold iron. Sound behaves oddly, voices flatten, footsteps carry farther than they should. Architects blame the low ceiling and hardwood resonance. Paranormal investigators suggest the same acoustics that delight musicians may also amplify frequencies below hearing, inducing unease. Whatever the reason, the gallery makes you feel accompanied. Visitors speak of sudden chills, of scents appearing, candle wax, horse sweat, the faintest trace of perfume. Occasionally, during evening events, lights dim for no reason. One guide swears that a candle flame bent sideways without draft while she recited Anne's death date. Another describes hearing distant laughter, light, young, then gone, as if an echo from a time when the house was still full of Boleyn children. Among Hever's lesser spirits is a man called Humphrey, said to have been a tenant murdered on the estate in the early 1600s. His story drifts between record and rumor, a dispute over land, a body found near the moat, justice never served. For generations, villagers spoke of heavy boots crossing the upper floor at harvest time, the sound of someone pacing with anger unresolved. Whether Humphrey ever existed scarcely matters now. His footsteps are part of the fabric, merging with the others so that the gallery becomes a chorus of invisible motion. During William Waldorf Astor's grand renovation from 1903 to 1908, workmen reported their own disturbances. Tools vanished overnight, reappearing neatly arranged by the windows. A carpenter who whistled while he worked claimed his tune was echoed softly from the opposite end of the gallery. The same melody, a half-beat late. The foreman ordered the men to ignore it and keep hammering. They did, but none would remain alone after sunset. In more recent decades, Hever's curators have adopted a polite neutrality. They acknowledge that the long gallery is atmospherically active, neither confirming nor denying the tales. Yet every December the same pattern returns. Temperature drops. The faint clip of hooves, the low groan of timbers, as if the house rehearses a memory. Scientists who have measured the gallery's acoustics note that the plank floor, made of old English oak, acts like a resonant board. Any vibration, even wind through a window latch, can travel its entire length, mimicking footsteps. Others suggest that changes in humidity cause the panels to contract, producing pops and creaks that the human brain arranges into rhythm. But none of this accounts for the scent of candle smoke or the mirrored shapes. Perhaps psychologists see the gallery as a perfect recording chamber, enclosed, linear, heavy with emotional history. They argue that the corridor functioned as the castle's artery, a place of movement, conversation, and decision. Such spaces, dense with human energy, are ideal for what researchers call residual hauntings, impressions that play themselves back like loops of sound embedded in wood and stone. Stand there now, when the last visitors have gone, and the modern world drops away. The floorboards breathe under your feet. Portraits stare from gilded frames. Somewhere beyond the windows, the moat laps faintly against its stones. Then comes a sound, distant, measured, approaching. Perhaps it's the settling of timber, perhaps memory walking its route once more. The air cools. A faint shimmer stirs in the mirror's surface. For a heartbeat, the corridor seems full. Then it empties again, leaving only the hush of centuries. Hever's long gallery is more than architecture. It is a resonator for the unseen, a place where history still takes its exercise, where the dead rehearse their routines out of habit, not malice. And as you step back into the stairwell, closing the heavy door behind you, the last echo follows like a breath, the softest click of hooves on wood, fading into silence. When Anne Boleyn's blood darkened the straw at the Tower of London in May 1536, Hever Castle fell abruptly silent. The laughter, the music, the soft thrum of diplomatic ambition, all were gone. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, returned here not as a statesman but as a broken man, widowed by scandal and stripped of his title's meaning. He survived his daughter by 3 years, dying within these same walls in 1539. They buried him in Hever's parish church, St. Peter's, a short walk from the castle. His brass memorial still lies there today, a sober effigy in armor, the inscription weathered by centuries of kneeling parishioners. Local legend claims that on certain nights his tomb weeps moisture that smells faintly of salt, as though the stone remembers the sea of grief that drowned the house. After Thomas's death, Hever reverted to the crown. Henry VIII, perhaps moved by irony or sentiment, granted it to Anne of Cleves, his 4th wife, as part of her annulment settlement in 1540. Unlike an Boleyn, Anne of Cleves outlived the king and all his other queens. She resided here often, calling it her beloved retreat. Letters in her hand describe Hever as a house of gentle air and quiet fields, wherein I may read and pray. For 2 decades she kept it in good order, filling its rooms again with music and hospitality. Yet even her tranquil presence could not lift the shadow. Visitors spoke of a heaviness that lingered in the corridors, especially in the chapel. Servants refused to clean there alone after sundown, claiming to hear a woman's footsteps pacing the aisle, the faint click of a rosary. Whether Anne of Cleves felt comfort or company, she never said. When she died in 1557, Hever passed through a tangle of noble families. The Waldegraves, the Humphreys, the Mead Waldos, each leaving their layer-like sediment in the moat. The house evolved from fortress to manor, from residence to relic. By the 18th century, it had faded into genteel neglect. Ivy swallowed the stone. Bats nested in the beams. Travelers described it as romantically decayed, its reflection perfect only because it had stopped moving. During those quiet centuries, the hauntings multiplied. Parish records mention locals seeing candlelight moving through shuttered windows. Shepherds crossing the fields after dusk reported hearing a woman singing in a language they did not know. Perhaps French, perhaps prayer. One 1769 letter to the Kentish Gazette recounts a white lady gliding near the moat, whose form was mirrored in the water though none stood above it. By then, the name Anne Boleyn had become shorthand for any ghostly woman of tragedy. Hever simply gave her back her stage. In the early 1800s, romantic writers discovered the ruin. Poets and painters came chasing melancholy beauty, and Hever supplied it in spades. An artist named Henry Bosville sketched the castle under moonlight and claimed that while drawing he heard a horse gallop once across the bridge and stopped dead. There was no bridge then, it had collapsed decades before. He left the sketch unfinished. The castle might have crumbled entirely had it not been for William Waldorf Astor, an American millionaire and Anglophile who bought Hever in 1903. To him, it was a sleeping masterpiece, the embodiment of Tudor romance. He poured fortune and imagination into its restoration, employing hundreds of craftsmen to rebuild and refurnish it exactly as it might have looked in Anne's day. They dredged the moat, recarved stonework, and laid the magnificent Italian garden, whose classical arches now framed the Eden Valley. Astor stocked the house with period furniture and a staggering collection of Tudor portraits, many genuine, some faithfully imagined. He kept a private study above the drawbridge and entertained visiting dignitaries by candlelight, insisting that electricity would spoil the mood. But as the lights returned, so did the ghosts. Workmen complained of tools moved overnight, ladders toppling without cause, and sudden cold drafts in sealed rooms. One mason swore that while carving an ornate cornice, he felt a hand rest lightly on his shoulder, steadying, not hostile. When he turned, no one stood there. Another worker fell from scaffolding after shouting that a woman had called his name. Astor himself was discreetly fascinated. His journals mention a sense of activity after midnight and his decision to leave the long gallery unlit, for the sake of those who walk there. He neither mocked nor advertised the phenomena. He simply allowed the house to be what it wished to be, alive. Through the 20th century, the castle passed from private estate to heritage site. Visitors came for history and left with stories. Staff catalogued mild but persistent disturbances, doors unlatching themselves in the long gallery even after being bolted, the smell of roses appearing in the chapel during winter months, children reporting a lady by the window in the drawing room described invariably as sad but kind. At least 3 separate tourists fainting near the bedchamber window linked to Bamford's 1976 encounter. During the filming of a 1992 BBC documentary, microphones picked up unexplained low frequencies, a steady, rhythmic pulse below 20 Hz. Sound engineers called it subaudible resonance from the moat's water pumps. Paranormal investigators countered that such frequencies are known to trigger sensations of presence and fear. The voice of the building, as one called it. Hever today is less a single story than a stack of them. The medieval keep, the Tudor manor, the Astor embellishments, each era left its echo. Walk from the Norman gatehouse into the Italian loggia, and you traverse 6 centuries in a dozen paces. Perhaps that is why the hauntings persist, the layers of memory so dense that time cannot settle. Psychologists might explain the phenomenon as emotional contagion. You know what happened here, and your imagination obliges. But even the skeptics fall quiet at night when fog thickens on the water and the castle seems to breathe. It's just atmosphere, one guide says, until you feel it looking back. Recent years have added new chapters. In 2014, a night watchman recorded motion sensors tripping along the upper corridor when the castle was locked. In 2017, CCTV captured a faint light crossing the bridge at 12:04 a.m. A single orb drifting steadily from gatehouse to oak before vanishing. The following morning, the ground was dusted with frost, except for one narrow line of melted footprints. Even now, locals claim that on quiet evenings you can hear a faint whinny near the long gallery windows, or catch the smell of horse sweat in the courtyard. Others speak of a soft female voice humming from the rose garden when the air is still. None of it can be proved. None of it will quite fade away. Hever Castle is not haunted by one spirit, but by many, by every life that left its trace. The Boleyns gave it passion. Anne of Cleves gave it grace. The Astors gave it preservation. Each era folded its emotions into the walls, turning stone into archive. The result is a house that does not merely remember, it performs. When the tourists depart and the gates close, Hever returns to its own time. The torches by the bridge reflect in the water, flicker once, and go dark. Somewhere inside, footsteps echo, measured, unhurried, unafraid. Perhaps they belong to Anne, to Thomas, to a mason still finishing his carving. Or perhaps they are the castle itself, shifting in its sleep, murmuring through the centuries that it is not done speaking yet. Every haunting begins as a story, a ripple of something felt, seen, or imagined, and then becomes a mirror. What we call a ghost often reflects not the dead but the living, our fears, our guilt, our longing for connection with a world that refuses to stay still. Hever Castle, with its moat and memory, is the perfect mirror. Across 6 centuries, its ghosts have changed shape to suit their witnesses. To a Tudor servant, the figure on the bridge was a soul in purgatory. To a Victorian tourist, she was romance in lace and sorrow. To a modern investigator, she is an electromagnetic disturbance. Yet beneath each interpretation lies the same pulse, the human conviction that places remember. Psychologists use the term topographical memory, how environments encode experience. Hever's design almost invites it. Water encloses the house like a thought that circles back on itself. Oak and stone absorb moisture, sound, even scent. The same materials that kept out invaders also hold in history. Stand in the long gallery and speak. The echo doesn't bounce, it lingers, a slow fade rather than a return. Sound engineers call this long reverberation time. Paranormal investigators call it residual energy. Both describe the same thing, a space that does not easily let go of what it receives. The stone tape theory, first popularized in the 1970s, suggests that strong emotion can imprint itself on physical matter, especially porous stone or wood. When conditions match the original event, humidity, temperature, resonance, the recording plays back as sound, light, or presence. At Hever, where love, betrayal, and grief collided, every beam and flagstone could be a spool of magnetic memory waiting for replay. Skeptics point out there's no empirical mechanism for emotion to store itself in minerals. But still, something about the theory feels right. Anyone who's walked into a room moments after an argument knows the air can carry tension. Multiply that by centuries, and a castle like Hever becomes a library of atmospheres. Modern research into infrasound offers another explanation. Low-frequency vibrations, below the threshold of human hearing, can cause the body to react as if threatened, hairs rising, heartbeat quickening, skin chilling. The moat's constant flow, the hollow chambers beneath the floors, even distant traffic can create those frequencies. When your body reacts before your mind can reason, the sensation feels supernatural. Lighting plays its part. Candlelight flickers at around 10 to 20 Hz, close to the rate at which the human eye begins to perceive motion in peripheral vision. In half-darkness, shadows seem to move. Combined with the castle's narrow sightlines and heavy wood tones, the mind composes figures where there are none. The result, the whisper of silk that's only your pulse in your ears. Yet to reduce every ghost to physics is to miss the larger truth. Haunting is cultural. People need certain places to carry their memories so they can travel light themselves. Hever, once a stage for ambition, became a sanctuary for reflection. The Victorians visited seeking the thrill of tragedy without risk. 20th century visitors, living through 2 world wars, found comfort in a story where love and loss were survivable through remembrance. Every generation rewrites Anne's ghost to match its mood. To the Reformation pamphleteers, she was divine justice walking. To Edwardian romantics, she was the emblem of doomed love. Today she stands for resilience, a woman whose voice could not be silenced even by death. The haunting endures because she has become what Carl Jung called an archetype, the eternal feminine betrayed. Still walking, still seen. Scientists measure temperature, humidity, magnetic flux. The soul measures meaning. The two are not enemies. They are different instruments, tuned to different frequencies. When investigators bring EMF meters to Hever, the devices spike near the chapel and Anne's room. Critics blame concealed wiring. Believers note that those are the very places where emotion once peaked. Both are right. The physical and the metaphysical overlap like reflections on the moat, to images of the same structure. Not everyone experiences Hever the same way. Some walk its corridors and feel nothing but history. Others, the instant they cross the threshold, sense a weight in the lungs. Neurologists studying temporal lobe sensitivity suggest that certain people's brains are more prone to pattern recognition. The same faculty that lets artists see form in clouds or composers hear melody in noise. The castle provides stimulus, the mind provides interpretation. But perhaps receptivity isn't a flaw. Perhaps ghosts require collaboration, a place that remembers and a person willing to listen. When both align, atmosphere, awareness, and need, the past becomes briefly audible. Think of Hever as an ecosystem of feeling. Grief feeds nostalgia. Nostalgia invites presence. Every tour guide, every candlelight story, every whisper shared by visitors adds another layer to the mythos, reinforcing the pattern until belief itself becomes part of the haunting. Parapsychologists note that reported phenomena spike after media coverage. The story calls the ghost as surely as the ghost calls the story. Anne Boleyn's spectral return each Christmas Eve may persist because thousands expect it to. Collective attention becomes invocation. Yet there are moments harder to dismiss. The precise accounts, separated by decades, the identical sense, the sudden cold. Science explains probabilities. Haunting thrives in exceptions. In truth, Hever's ghost is less apparition than metaphor. Anne's presence embodies the persistence of identity beyond erasure, a spirit of intellect and defiance that even execution could not silence. To say she walks the bridge is to say that memory can still cross the distance between centuries. Her apparition gives form to the idea that love, injustice, and longing leave residue. Every culture calls that residue by a different name: aura, spirit, echo. Hever simply calls it Anne. Perhaps the real haunting is mutual. We return to her story as often as she returns to her home. Visitors leaning over the moat's rail cast their reflections into the same water she once watched. They become, for a moment, the ghost of the future haunting the past. The castle reminds us that to be remembered is a kind of immortality. Buildings like Hever keep the contract. We keep their stones alive. They keep our stories anchored. Somewhere between that exchange, between history and hope, the boundary between the living and the dead grows porous. So when the guides blow out the last candle and the bridge fades into mist, the question is no longer whether Anne's spirit walks there, but whether we, in seeking her, have already joined the procession. Hever's haunting is psychological, yes, but psychology is simply the modern name for what the ancients called the soul. And in the hush that follows midnight, when the castle's lights sink into the moat's glass, the mind and the heart agree on one small human truth. The past is never gone. It only waits for someone to notice it breathing. Dawn comes slowly to Hever. Mist drifts off the moat in pale ribbons, and the first light touches the stone like a hand reacquainting itself with skin. The yew hedges stand black against the sky. The swans trace mirrored arcs across the water. Everything about this place feels deliberate, as if even the landscape understands its role in the story. Hever Castle has outlasted its owners, its politics, and the very faith that once consecrated its chapel. What remains is memory, layered, patient, alive. It is in the chill that precedes sunrise, in the echo of boots on oak, in the hush that falls when the last visitor lingers too long by the bridge. Here, ghosts are not intrusions. They are continuity. Every legend must find its final image, and for Hever it is always the same. A woman crossing the bridge on Christmas Eve, pausing beneath the oak before dissolving into the mist. For centuries, people have called her Anne Boleyn, though what returns each year may be something far larger, a condensation of all that Hever has witnessed. The story has absorbed the woman, and the woman has absorbed the place. If she walks not as queen or condemned, but as daughter. Her hand trails the same stone parapet she once leaned upon as a child. The moat reflects her outline, wavers, then steadies, as if reluctant to let her go. Perhaps she steps through the archway and climbs the familiar stair to the chapel, where candlelight trembles on old brass and the smell of wax mingles with damp air. There she kneels, not to beg, but to remember. Outside, frost whitens the lawns, the trees bow beneath its weight, and the whole castle seems to hold its breath. The hour between night and morning belongs to her. In some inexplicable way, Hever behaves like a host. The fires still burn low in winter. Flowers still crowd the rose garden each spring. The drawbridge still lowers for guests who come seeking history and find instead atmosphere. Every restoration, every tour, every whisper keeps the rhythm of habitation alive. The living keep the castle warm. The dead keep it meaningful. Curators say that when the castle is empty, it creaks like a ship at anchor. Pipes tick, boards settle, the moat laps softly. Yet amid those ordinary sounds, there are moments that feel staged for someone unseen. A sudden waft of perfume, a door easing open as if anticipating company. One might think the house remembers the pattern of its former life and rehearses it endlessly, setting the scene for the woman who will always return. History reduced Anne Boleyn to 2 acts, seduction and execution. Hever restores the 3rd, existence. Here she is, neither court's pawn nor martyr's effigy. She is laughter in the courtyard, intelligence in motion, ambition still bright with possibility. The ghost that walks Hever is not the echo of her death, but the persistence of her life. To see her as mere spirit is to miss the point. She endures because her story touches everything human: desire, power, faith, and the cost of being extraordinary in an age that punished it. The bridge she crosses each Christmas Eve is more than a setting. It is metaphor, connecting what was to what is. Each footstep carries her from the world that destroyed her toward the one that still remembers. Every visitor who pauses at the moat becomes part of the haunting. The camera flashes, the whispered awe, the careful tread over an even stone, all of it feeds the legend. A haunting survives only through witnesses, and Hever has never lacked them. The gardeners who sense perfume in midwinter, the night guards who hear the faint click of heels, the families who light candles in the chapel, they are all keepers of the continuity. In their stories, Anne Boleyn is neither apparition nor abstraction. She is present, a reminder that memory is a kind of faith. To believe she walks is to affirm that something of us, too, will outlast the calendar. Psychologists speak of closure. History rarely grants it. Hever offers something subtler: repetition with grace. Every December, when frost rims the bridge and moonlight silvers the moat. The legend repeats, not to trap her, but to release her anew. She walks, pauses, fades. The pattern completes itself and begins again. In that repetition lies a truth older than science, that love, loss, and longing never truly finish, they simply change form. A castle remembers, water remembers, so do we. The act of telling her story, again and again, becomes its own resurrection. Imagine the closing shot. The camera drifts across the moat. The castle glows faintly from within. One candle, one reflection. Mist curls like smoke from invisible fires. Then, on the bridge, movement, a glimmer of white, the whisper of silk. She turns toward the house, the faintest smile tracing her lips, a queen not of England, but of endurance. As she reaches the threshold, the image begins to dissolve. Light spills outward, filling the frame, until all that remains is brightness and water, and the sound of distant bells from St. Peter's Church. Hever stands today not merely as a monument to Tudor ambition, but as a sanctuary for everything we refuse to forget. Its walls hold the laughter of children, the footsteps of kings, the breath of lovers, the chill of sorrow, and the warmth of retelling. Each visitor carries a fragment away, a photograph, a feeling, a conviction that something unseen accompanies them back across the drawbridge. And maybe that is the true haunting. The ghosts we seek in castles are never trapped there. They follow us home, inhabiting our imagination, urging us to remember that time is porous, that love survives architecture. When night falls again over the Eden Valley, the castle slips back into its vigil. Mist thickens, stars dim behind low clouds, and the surface of the moat turns to dark glass. Somewhere beyond sight, footsteps approach, the soft, deliberate tread of someone who knows the way. She crosses the bridge without sound, pauses beneath the oak, and for one heartbeat the air fills with the scent of roses and frost. Then she is gone. But Hever does not return to silence. It hums with a low, continuous memory, the vibration of a house that knows it is watched, loved, and alive. Anne Boleyn is home once more, and the castle breathes easier for it. The queen who lost her crown keeps her kingdom still, not of land or loyalty, but of remembrance. And as the first bell of Christmas morning rings across the frozen fields of Kent, Hever Castle stands luminous against the mist, proving that the past does not die. It simply finds new ways to come home. Hever Castle stands, as it always has, a perfect contradiction. A fortress and a home. A museum and a memory. A place where history feels so near you can almost touch it, and yet just out of reach, like the reflection trembling on its moat. Over 8 centuries have passed since the first stone was set beside the River Eden. Kings and queens have come and gone, wars have burned and cooled, religions have risen and fractured. Still the moat circles, the yews endure, and the same mist drifts over the same water each winter morning. Time may have moved on, but Hever has never quite agreed to follow. Today, Hever Castle is open to the world. Visitors cross the drawbridge that once separated the Boleyns, private life from the English court, and step into rooms restored with painstaking care. The great hall, lined with portraits and tapestries, still smells faintly of oak polish and old wax. The long gallery, once the stage for kings and ghosts alike, now hosts exhibitions of Tudor art and heritage. And Anne's own bedchamber remains the heart of it all, not for its grandeur, but for the hush that lingers there. Beyond the walls stretch 125 acres of gardens, The Italian garden with its statues and lakes, the rose garden, the maze of yew hedges. Each corner feels like a continuation of the story, a world that has learned to bloom around grief. In summer, the air hums with bees and the laughter of tourists. In winter, the fog returns, wrapping the house in silence. Both seasons suited. The castle's caretakers maintain a careful balance, preservation without embalming, storytelling without spectacle. They know that Hever is not just history to be studied, but experience to be felt. Each guide who leads a tour through the great hall, each gardener pruning the rose bushes that trace Anne's footsteps, participates in the quiet pact that keeps the house alive. Remember her, but do not disturb her. Every year, thousands make the pilgrimage, historians, romantics, skeptics, and the simply curious. Some come seeking Tudor politics, others the whisper of something beyond it. They walk the paths where Anne played as a child, stand before the bridge where she is said to return, and lean over the moat to watch their own reflections dissolve in the same dark water. The reactions differ. Some leave with photographs, some with questions, a few with goosebumps they can't quite explain. A modern visitor described it best. You don't see a ghost at Hever. You feel like you've just missed one. Night events are still held, candlelit tours where guides speak softly of Anne's story, her letters, her courage, and the sightings that have never quite stopped. The skeptical smile. The believers listen harder. Both groups fall silent as they cross the bridge. Everyone glances at the water. The Astor family's early 20th century restoration saved Hever from ruin, but its soul remained untouched. The castle changed hands again in 1983, when it was purchased by Broadland Properties and opened more widely to the public. Since then, restoration has continued with almost monastic devotion, repairs made by hand, archives digitized, gardens replanted to their Tudor designs. Even the moat is cleaned by divers who claim the water has a pull to it, as if it resists disturbance. Every layer of care feels like a conversation with history, the living speaking softly to the dead. The curators have learned that the hauntings are part of the inheritance. They don't exploit them, but they don't deny them either. When asked, they smile and say what everyone who works there eventually learns. You don't need to see her to know she's here. Hever remains a place where ordinary sounds, boots on stone, laughter, the splash of a duck landing on the moat carry weight. Everything echoes slightly, as if the castle is repeating the world back to you. Some evenings, when the grounds are empty and the light drains from the sky, the air feels dense with all that has happened here. The scent of cut grass mingles with candle wax and roses. A door clicks shut somewhere deep inside. It would be easy to call it imagination, but imagination is only another form of memory. People return to Hever, not to chase ghosts, but to be reminded that history breathes. The castle is proof that the past is not a sequence of dates, but a living texture that folds into the present. The haunting endures because the emotion behind it endures, the longing to go home, the hope that love and loss leave traces. Anne's story, once tragedy, has become something gentler here. She no longer pleads or suffers. She simply exists, woven into every candle flame, every ripple of water, every whisper across the bridge. She is no longer the queen who died, but the woman who came home. If you visit at closing time, when the crowds have gone and dusk turns the moat to silver, you might glimpse it, the castle's reflection perfectly still, the bridge empty, and yet the faint impression of motion, like a dress caught in a breeze that isn't there. You'll blink and it will be gone. Only the quiet will remain, and maybe the faint smell of roses on the cold air. Hever Castle doesn't need to prove its ghosts. It only needs to keep its promise, to remember, and it does. Year after year, through frost and rain, through restoration and retelling, it holds its vigil. Its towers catch the dawn, its moat reflects the stars, and somewhere within that eternal exchange between water and light, the spirit of Anne Boleyn, daughter, queen, legend, keeps her watch. Because some stories are too vivid to end, some homes too loved to forget, and some ghosts, once invited, never truly leave. The story of Hever Castle is not just history, it is remembrance. Its stones have heard love declared and lives undone. They've watched centuries pass, yet still they listen. Anne Boleyn's voice has faded, but her presence remains in every candle that flickers, every rose that blooms, every ripple of water that touches the bridge. Time tried to silence her. Hever never did. So when you walk its corridors, tread softly. You move through a house that remembers you as much as you remember it. And somewhere beyond the mist and moonlight, beneath the echo of your own footsteps, the past exhales once more, welcoming home the queen who never truly left.